Good morning, and thank you for joining us today on this panel discussion on inclusive leadership in the times of crisis and how companies can create a sense of inclusion in the remote working environment. My name is Ratika Mittal, and I will be your host for this session. Before we really open up the discussion to the panelists, I would like to tell you why is this session close to my heart. Last 15 to 18 months have been tough on all of us. They've been tough physically, emotionally, mentally. And while we've been navigating the new normal and working from home, one is hearing more and more about anxiety, loneliness, and burnout. As per a recent HBR article, people are spending more time at work. They are spending more time. The office emails post-work hours have increased by more than 10%. And the number of meetings, again, has increased by more than 10% during the pandemic. All this leading to burnout. In my 2 decades of corporate career, I have never seen something like this, where overnight the entire world was asked to move online and start working from home. But most recently, in my current role as a leadership coach, I'm hearing a lot of leaders talk about personal and team exhaustion. They're constantly worrying about the anxiety and uncertainty about returning to work, questions on how do I keep my team engaged and tackle the changes and the challenges going forward. They're worried about mental well-being and health of their employees, both of which are equally important for the engagement levels as well as productivity. So all these questions are bothering them, they're bothering me, and I assume a lot of us. And therefore, I'm really looking forward to this discussion today with our two amazing women leaders. Let me take a moment to introduce them to you. Starting with Vanessa. Vanessa is an author, a motivational speaker, founder and managing director of WeAreTheCity. At the height of her successful 25 years career in financial services, Vanessa launched the award-winning WeAreTheCity.com in 2008 as a vehicle to help women progress in their careers. WeAreTheCity now has over 1 lakh members and provides resources, conferences, awards, jobs to women across UK. Vanessa is also the founder of the UK-wide Diversity Forum Gender Networks, which brings together diversity leaders from 85 cross-sector firms to share best practices. And she's joining us from London today. So good morning, Vanessa, and welcome.
Good morning, Ratika, and thank you for having me.
Thank you. Our other panelist today is RajKamal. She's the HR leader in one of the top private bank in India, in Axis Bank. And she brings with her over 2 decades of leadership experience in the HR fraternity. And I'm really excited and looking forward to hearing her thought on inclusive leadership and what can be done to ensure that employees feel inclusive in the remote working environment as well. So welcome, Raj.
Thank you, Ratika. I really look forward to this conversation with you and Vanessa as well.
Great. So Vanessa, let me start with you. You're a founder, CEO, and have been a long-standing advocate of diversity and inclusion. What comes to your mind when you hear inclusive leadership? And more specifically, can you share some of the challenges that you may have faced in your professional or personal journey during the crisis most recently?
So I think I'm going to address the second part of the question first, because then it will lead me into the first. I think the past 18 months have been exceptionally tough, from an entrepreneurial perspective, as a mother, as a partner as well, because there was so much, it just happened in an instant. So for me, it was around International Women's Day. I'm normally out doing talks in different corporates. I had about 15 different events that I needed to attend to. And that first week, I think there was this feeling, this can't be right. This is not going to happen to us. This is the stuff that we see in films, global pandemics, and then bit by bit, all of my kind of sessions were being cancelled. And I think we were just thrown into this moment of I don't even think it was panic. I think it was more shock around what was kind of going on in the world. And then the pure realization of what that meant, how do we continue to run our businesses? How do we keep our children educated? How do we keep safe so that we don't catch this virus? How do we protect elderly parents? There was a long list of things that, that you had to think about almost in a nanosecond. And I think, from my own personal perspective, There was an element of safety when we were locked down in the UK. My family were with me. everyone was in the same bubble. I knew where everyone was. It was quite a nice feeling from that perspective. But then again, the stark reality, I mean, we had panics over, food buying. You didn't necessarily see the good side of people when, elderly people couldn't get access to the food that they needed in the supermarkets because people were stockpiling and stuff like that. So it didn't show necessarily the best part of society, I think, in the beginning, because everyone was in a panic. And I think from a company perspective, I mean, obviously in my business, we run events, we sell tickets. So just thinking that revenue stream just disappeared. There was no business. And from the first thing that kind of we did was think, how can we help others? So everyone must have been feeling like how we were feeling, or like, what's going to happen? What kind of comes next? Let's say you're worrying about your family, you're worrying about your income, you're worrying about everything else. We set up a series of webinars, free webinars, that were accessibly globally, to help people deal with their mental health and their anxiety. So I put something on LinkedIn saying, I want to do these webinars for everyone, just half an hour. They can tune in over lunchtime just to let them know they're not alone and that we've all got these fears and things like that. And I put something on LinkedIn to say, are there any coaches or anybody like that can help us to do that? And by the Monday, my inbox was just flooded with people, an outpouring of people that also wanted to help, that I think was cathartic for them to use their wisdom and their knowledge to help others, because I think that was a natural thing that we all wanted to do. Although we was worried about ourselves, we was worried about everyone else. So we set up those webinars and we focused on mental health, anxiety, caring for your children at home. I mean, all of a sudden the kids were at home, right? So how do you work? And from our perspective, the mums, and it fell to the mums that had to homeschool, the care of your elderly parents that you just took for granted, that you could just nip up the road and see them. All of a sudden they were shielding, so you couldn't do that. So we set up these webinars and they were really well received. Even things like how to turn your home into a gym, because, exercise releases endorphins and things like that, so you want to keep yourself healthy. We've already seen the fallout of lack of attention to health in the UK for those 18 months, with people deferring, little lumps and bumps they may have found on their body, or, things that we naturally would have gone to the doctors for. And we thought, we don't want to put the strain on our health system, so we just put it off and we won't go. And we're seeing the fallout of that from a mental health perspective in the world of work, from even like across cancers and stuff like that, because we're so behind. So initially, as I say, it was a bit of a panic station, and for our business as well, it's like, how do we deliver this large conference that we was planned to do, which kind of pays my team and keeps us afloat as a business, enables us to do the good stuff. And we decided, that conference was due to happen in November. We pulled it back to May. We had 9 weeks to plan it. I had to convince sponsors that going online was going to be a thing with these conferences that enabled us to go global and things like that. And we delivered that in like 9 weeks, 1,200 women, which was incredible. But again, it was the sheer, I think you go into kind of a mode of survival because you have to. And I don't think you really give much thought about your own mental health at that particular point. I think there comes a point where you feel in a safe space. Perhaps this was a few months on, we delivered the conference, and then you actually stop and take a breath. And then it's like, it hits you like a big ball. And then that's when I think, overwhelmed, confusion of how long is this going to go on? And do we have to have that mad period again? So, and I think businesses were the same. And I was saying to a couple, most of my clients are banking clients. And I remember, in my years in banking, if I ever suggested that we could have a trading floor where people working from home, I would have been met with, you're crazy, and they would have marched me out the building because of the regulation, everything like that. And yet within weeks, the likes of Goldman's, Credit Suisse, HSBC, all of their traders were at home. And it's been really interesting talking to some of my other clients, because there was a peak after a bit of a lull, I think, where everyone was going, oh my God, what we're doing. There was this huge peak of productivity, after kind of once we'd sorted out the school system. And I say the homeschooling bit was tough on women here. And there is there's lots of talk about us going back years and years in terms of gender equality, in the UK, because it put us back into that role of running the home, looking after the children, and all of our jobs kind of took a bit of a backseat for a long time. So I think companies, one of my observations would be that after a period of kind of what are we doing, let's get the business earning money, whether it was the same money, then it was a very much let's turn to our people. And I think leaders had to learn to be more empathetic. You've got to remember, we're seeing into people's homes. You know, we're seeing kids running past in the background and, you know, people saying, hold on, there's someone at my door, you know, and so all of that. And I think leaders have had more insights as to the challenges that sometimes we hide that we have to deal with in our home lives. So I think it's been a huge transition. And it's very interesting to see at the moment that some companies a few months ago were like, you can work from home forever. It's not a problem like the big tech companies. And now they're saying, actually, you can only do 3 days a week. You must do 3 days a week. And if you want to do any more than that, you need to sign off by a manager. And I'm like, this is crazy, because you will lose your people, because there are some people that are not built to work from home, motivation. They're not in the right kind of home confines to be able to do that. You know, they might still have parents at home and stuff like that that will call on them even though they're at work, you know. So I think those companies will lose a war on talent. But yeah, so just my observations, but a tough time.
No, absolutely. And thanks so much for sharing that. Two things that, really strike me. One, of course, you said that you actually pulled forward a conference when you were going through a crisis. So that's going to be interesting to hear. And I'm going to come back to you on your observation on talent retention, on how the companies are coming back to you. So that's something that I'm going to come back to you. But before that, Raj, the question to you, similar question. I know, again, HR leader, inclusive leadership is top priority. It's been something that you've always believed in. So again, if you could share with our audiences and with us here that what does it really mean to you? And is there a difference that you perceive or see the way other leaders look at inclusive leadership, right? So simply put, is there a difference the way HR leader looks at it, so you look at it, and is there a difference in a way a sales director would look at inclusive, or an operations director or someone in that position would look at it differently?
One of the things fascinating conversation, and I'm just struggling to come out with, many thoughts, trying to put it cogently. Let's just look at the context that we have. And I really like this Viktor Frankl's quote, really, between stimulus and response, there is always a space. And in that space really lies the power to grow and, freedom, I think. That's what he said. And that's what happened with COVID. The context right now, and I'm just taking back and building on what Vanessa said, the interesting part is emotions were back in the workplace, right? Work has spilled over to your home, emotions have spilled over to work. So it's an interesting paradox that we're dealing with. Managers had to deal with two things: managing the task at hand, just running the commercial organization, whilst managing emotions, and also playing in the blind, not really knowing what's happening on the other side, dealing with the pandemic and anxiety. And especially as bankers, we were essential workers. We didn't get the luxury of sitting at home. Say 60% of us, 65% of our staff was in the offices during the pandemic. And please, not to, I just want to emphasize the fact they were out commuting by themselves when the public transport was shut down, complete lockdown, right? I know of cases where the spouses and the partners were trying to ferry around, and the police was out there saying, why have you come out of the lockdown? And then we had to show them the badge. It was a nightmare initially. And I know all of us dealt with it. Then there was a section we kind of said, okay, you work permanently from home. And I completely agree. Traders, for the first time within the regulatory concern, everybody was working out of home. There was no choice. And then we also recognized that this would be a series of start, stop, right? We went to office December. We said, anyways, in May, we kind of said we'll work hybrid for most of us. And then December, the leaders went to office, and by March, we pulled back again. And with the series of changes that are happening in the world and in our environment, especially how we are managing our workplaces, and I can't agree more with Vanessa, the fact that you're managing your kids, parents, loved ones, people who are suffering through the crisis, etc. I'm just saying that emotion part has been in a sense, this is a gift of the pandemic. And I'm using the word very carefully, the gift of the pandemic, because this needs to be harnessed to say 3 things happen for me. Work can happen out of anywhere. The flexibility is not a gift that you're giving to people, right? Which bodes well. And I am very, very optimistic because it will definitely give voice and choice to people. And if inclusion is about giving a voice and choice to people, this ensures that is done. Second thing I think is, if work is, you're managing work remotely, etc. Not only are you relooking at your formats, but you're also looking at leadership style. It's not about the face time anymore. It's about the outcomes, right? So you a little bit more planned. There's a cadence to it because people actually in our context, because we're not used to working from home, we didn't know what does teams mean or what does collaboration mean. We had to rewire ourselves. And most of us for 1.5 months, we're just struggling with, kind of ensuring our work that happens in offices is kind of put on teams, and then we work with a rhythm. So that's the other benefit. So if you're working towards outcomes, you really don't care how much time is the person spending on providing face time or giving face time, which is also another reason for people to drop off. Third thing is, I think it's led to a lot of experimentation. And like we did a big experiment of saying, we'll hire gig workers, we'll do a pilot of going remote. As of now, we have 3,000 people who've been given the choice and voice, completely remote. They are 50, most of them are actually operating out of their hometowns, tier 2 towns, tier 3 towns. And as you said, when we did the pilot for 50 roles, I remember, and I said it was gig workers, specialized people. We thought we'll get some response. We got 60,000 resumes. The inboxes, the platforms were clogged. And here is where I was thinking, maybe there is something here. We are not recognizing the power of choice that people are exercising these days. And companies have to recognize it. And once that happened, and the kind of people that came into our fold, it again set a chain reaction in terms of leadership looking at, we need to think differently. As long as that was done, the fact that work can happen anywhere, you've got to relook at how the work is done, give a voice and choice to people, and the section and the society is changing. And frankly speaking, I would say one of the big things technology has done is not only augment the work, but also made it a lot more personal. As many cases are there who don't want to come to office, there are cases who want to come to office. I've had people grieving differently, right? Some people want to share their personal story if they've lost a loved one, and there are some people who clamor. And technology has given space to people to be, rather than having a single template, right? That's what I would say, the silver lining of this pandemic is that insight and that recognition is there that people are different. We've got to have different templates. For me, that is inclusion. Again, it is about giving voice, choice to people. And it starts with not only just the gender part of it, it's cognitive diversity to how do you look at hiring people, selecting people, making work happen, and not really being bound by a single template. And that, I think, is the strength of what we are seeing in the context. And most organizations, if they harness this energy, I'm fairly optimistic that we will definitely see a more inclusive workforce rather than being prisoners of, certain privileged beneficiaries.
Thanks so much, Raj. I mean, I really like the word and the use of words of voice and choice. Resonates so well, simple to understand. And so thanks so much for sharing that and bringing emotions into work. I think somewhere empathy, compassion was lost when we were all running towards business roles. The pandemic in a good way has brought all those feelings and emotions back there. So thanks so much for sharing your thoughts on this one. Vanessa, coming back to you, and you talked about some of the challenges that you had faced while you were moving in from suddenly from one place to the other and working from home and organizing webinars and conferences online. Would you like to share some interesting practices that you may have followed or observed that others have done across you, and something that we can learn from your experience?
So initially, when we had the idea, it was looking at what platforms to use to run our conference because they were expensive, and the providers of those platforms knew that they had the golden ticket that every events organizer would want. And there's only so much you can do on Zoom, or I mean, and Teams has kind of evolved over the last 18 months, but finding a platform that would enable us to deliver the kind of conference that we would have delivered in person, you know, where we could have exhibition booths, where we could have, you know, open chat rooms, where it was aesthetically pleasing and we could get as close to that kind of conference feel as possible. So the first journey for us was finding the right platform. And I'll be honest with you, year one, it looks seamless on the front end, but the back end, and I mean, I don't have a massive team. So not only were my team all of a sudden all at home, they've all got young children, they were homeschooling, they was having to learn this entire new platform, bring all of the work we would have done at the end of the year into this period, which also overlapped with our biggest awards that we do. So we found a platform, and it was a brilliant piece of technology, but it was the entrepreneurial team behind it were a startup. So, you know, when we asked for global hours, the support wasn't there for global hours. You know, we were still, I think we knew what we were dealing with when the CEO of the company got on to change some code. And we were like, oh no, how many of you are there? You know, because I'd gone and sold this conference to like 15 big corporate sponsors. We had all these people coming. And even the night before, it still wasn't working properly. And I was like, we're crushed. You know, and I knew people would be more understanding because of the, you know, the fact that we'd done it in 9 weeks, the fact that we were brave enough to be the first kind of big organization or small organization that when the show goes on, we're going to put something on. We're going to keep our ladies learning about technology to, you know, going back to Raj's point, technology being a massive enabler for us during the pandemic. And the reason we do that conference anyway is a lot of the conferences talk to women about soft skills. I want to talk to technologists about technology. I want to talk to them about AI and cyber and things like that. So it was more important that we didn't, you know, we already suffer with the amount of women in tech. I think it's 16% globally. That conference had to go ahead. So the observation I would use, and we use a different platform the second time around, is make sure you've got the right platform. I'd say that nothing can't be done. I mean, my team came together like such a cohesive unit because we were all fighting to survive. You know, we all wanted to keep our reputation as high as what it was. We was going to deliver that conference. And when we come to do it again this year, there was the talk, oh, should we do it again this year? And we thought things were opening up. As you say, that yo-yo, they're opening up, they're closing. It was like, right, we've got all that lessons learned from last year. You know, I look back at that first conference, I packed too much in, there wasn't enough breaks, you know, so when we done this one, it was like, right, let's do it over 3 days, not 1 day. Let's build some breaks so people can actually have some time rather than like session. We knew that online platforms are very, very difficult in terms of engagement with sponsor booths and stuff. So we chose a platform this year that had gamification in it. So to incentivize the attendees to go and earn points by doing certain actions. So they got a little bit competitive with each other. You know, we hid things in sponsor booths that were virtual, so people had to go and find them to win prizes. So it's just thinking about how you incentivize people, because it wasn't a physical conference where people come and collect USB sticks and pens and, you know, and that's how you get their engagement. So that was a big learning curve. And even this year, I mean, obviously we've had in the UK, we've been delayed again in terms of our Freedom Day, but we're probably just going to do the conference virtual. Again, we will have like a hybrid. We'll have a physical day that will happen, hopefully February next year. But to the plus point, back to Raj's point, we went global overnight. I got to see women in my conference I never would have got to. Women that were in the back end of, you know, the UK, that were in places in India, you know, that wouldn't have, no way would they have been able to travel to London, you know. So in terms of the reach that we had through that conference, I don't want to lose that, which is why going forward, we will always have something that is virtual online in everything we do. And I'll just tell you another quick story with our awards. So our awards are normally in a hotel, you know, people come, eat together, you know, I'm a big believer, family that eats together, stays together. And this year it's all been virtual. But what's been so wonderful about that is we haven't had to charge for tickets because we don't have expensive hotel bills. But we've had like aunties in, in places like Cambodia. We've had uncles out in, Canada, people from all over the world, and India too, watching their family member be recognized with our awards. And that is beautiful. So there's elements of it I don't want to get rid of. I want to keep that. I want to keep that global connectivity. And I think now we're all, and again, going back to the point about do we return, do we not return? It's a difficult one, because I think at the moment everyone's watching what everyone else is doing. But even when I went into the City of London, which is like the financial hub, like this week, it was empty. People are still not there. So you have to also consider the knock-on effect that has to other entrepreneurs, the coffee sellers, the cleaners and stuff like that. So I still think whatever way we find around it, we've got to make sure that something works for all and that everybody is kind of supported. But I do agree with Raj's point around people are comfortable being at home. We've had 18 months to get used to this lifestyle. I got another dog. I wouldn't have got another dog if I was going up to London. The children have got a completely different kind of, the ones at university and the other one's just about to go, but they're used to being at home. We spend more family time together, and I don't want to lose that. I spent 25 years up in London, flying around the world, not seeing my kids as much as I would have liked to. I don't want to go back to that.
No, that's so true. And really talking about the platform and the power of technology. And I think what you mentioned in terms of the reach, literally everyone across the globe could attend your conferences, and the way the families could attend, right? It's usually all of us have lived through those award ceremonies. You facilitated the awardees and given out in fancy hotels, banquet halls with all the jazz, but the families were never part of it. But today they are. So I think that's a clear advantage. Again, one of those things that talks about inclusion and how you can really take it forward from there. So thanks so much, Vanessa, for sharing that. Raj, coming back to you, and I'm going to link this to what you said, and we're all aware in India, banking was an essential service, right? And from day one, so while everything else shut, bankers had to continue to work, your branches had to open, you had 60% of the staff, like you said, still working. And there were huge challenges, logistics, getting people to work when the public transports are short. And I'm sure there's a sense of fear in those employees who were coming to work. We were not sure what the pandemic is all about. Is it going to impact me? What happens if I get, I catch COVID, and then what happens to me, my family, isolations, all those things that were brimming in everyone's mind. What did you and the leadership team really do to ensure that these set of people who were coming to the branches or to the offices felt safe, felt included, and felt part of the organization, which was otherwise probably sitting at home?
I think many things. There's no one magic bullet here. One was a track that we set out very early on to say manage the pandemic. Actually, I remember sitting in my cafeteria with my CEO in February, and I said, "Oh, the pandemic's not going to come here." And I know the leadership team, and he particularly insisted, "Just let's get prepared." We started in February, right? We didn't have laptops so to say, in terms of Microsoft Teams. We didn't have a license, all of that, right? But what we did was, at that time, we just prepared early, ensured that there were tracks. And there was one track for the branches, the people who are serving the customer. And we kind of made committees and councils, people who take their own decisions, right? And that was set late February. And that worked our way through, because constant advisories, and Vanessa may not know this, we were actually getting, practically every day there was some advice from the regulator, from the local government. This is okay, not okay, what needs to be done if somebody is COVID. And initially it was about, if you served a customer who has visited any of the foreign countries, so to say, in the last 15 days, you've got to quarantine yourself. It was, huge number of advisories, and we needed to ensure that the communication was seamless. So we kind of said, there is a central team who's looking at it, but there are local leaders who were put in place, who we said, okay, these are the boundary conditions, go with it. And we trusted them. That, I think, was one key decision we took so as to ensure that there is greater empowerment and people on the ground know what needs to be done, and there's greater clarity as well. So that was done in terms of managing the pandemic. So in that track, we also ensured that how will we do our fumigation, what sanitization efforts, what if somebody's stuck? So we had like people being shipped from one location to another during pandemic, especially if their loved ones needed help. So we did all of that, right? That was one. Then we kind of put out there in terms of how the enabling teams like both ops, technology, people managing the facilities were out there helping people. So we said no holds barred help needs to be provided. The second track really was ensuring stickers and whatever public transport we could muster for people when they needed to travel. So all the arrangements that we could do within our within our capability and whatever we could do, we provided for that. But the third important part is, I think, communication. In any crisis and any leadership role, especially when things are uncertain, you need to be out there. And I know for sure we were like communicating in batches, in cohorts, in horizontals, in verticals, all kinds of segmentation we did, where the CEO is communicating, I'm communicating, no amount of communication was less. And during the initial period, it was also about gratitude that you are out there. And I think the funny thing about life is purpose. Most of the bankers, they came back and said, the fact that we were tagged as essential workers, it's in a sense, we are here to serve people who need money. So actually 90% of them didn't even bat an eyelid. Maybe the younger ones who'd come into the folds of banking, their parents needed reassurance, my child, my son, my daughter, they've just joined and there's pandemic, they have to go to offices whereas the rest of the country is in lockdown. What are you doing? So there was some, counseling, we ramped up all of those support services we put out there, but this purpose was very, very critical to ensure people remain true to what they needed to do, because it was a task that needed to be done. And I think above all, in all of this, I think the spirit of, as a banker, build trust. And another thing that we did, which is very different, is we said, okay, everybody has to change. During this time, people said, okay, what do we need to do? Because customers are not going to the branches, not all of them, only in very dire circumstances would they come to branches. And the interesting thing, we said, okay, always there are skills that are there in the organization. There are adjacencies, learn from them. So we had the outbound call center training team, teaching our branch office staff, people who service customers physically, how to deal with customers in a virtual mode. All those skilling activities ensured that we are able to provide the trust, the faith, what they needed. And I'm glad to say, actually, one of the testimonies was we also got an award for most helpful bank during COVID crisis. And I think that also just emboldened people and you feel proud about it, what you're doing. So that actually heads up. I think communication, empathetic leadership, ensuring the enablers are there, communicate, and be very clear. Especially in uncertain environment, you've got to be really, really clear. Yeah, I guess that's about it. But we've had so many series of ups and downs, start, stop. You would, get people unrostered and then we say, no, pandemics come, just roster them back again. So through multiple waves, we've had different challenges, but the one thing that stayed is trust your leaders. Trust is a big currency that we have. We've got to harness this in good times and especially the bad times. And when you invest in it good times, it'll help you out in the bad times as well. And especially if you're driving the change that we've talked about.
Absolutely. And I couldn't agree with you more that communication is the key, and no amount of communication is more today. You really need to let everyone know what's happening around. I'm going to come back to you on the trust your leader piece and, take it on from there. But Vanessa, just picking up on what Raj talked about, upskilling the staff and the employees, right? Because there was a need for changing the way we were doing our work. Would you have similar examples or something to share or talk about that you may have observed in London in your work?
So I think, in terms of skills, there are a lot of skills. I think individual members of staff had to learn how to be leaders themselves, you know, because they, as you say, going back to talking about the communication point as well, you know, there weren't people that were instructed to communicate, to put their arms around staff or to check in on certain people, but they just did it. So I think there were the big observation I would have is that we were all leaders in that period, and some have stepped up to that and actually like that people side and will probably pursue that as a career because they've had a taste of it. And also they may not have been given that opportunity to do that before. I think it was very much, and just an observation of a few of my clients, because certain people had to drop off, as I say, for caring responsibilities, people had to step up and fill in for other people's jobs. So they naturally learn to keep the lights on. They naturally learn new skills. I also think there was a period, and we noticed it with the webinars that I mentioned earlier on, of time for self-development. Once the dust had settled a little bit, they'd never had time to attend these webinars. You know, the webinars that we were putting on, if you was in your workplace, you would have found an excuse. You'd have gone out for lunch, gone and got a sandwich, or you would have met someone else. But all of a sudden you had this hour or this half an hour, and you were like, I can nip on and I can learn. So like those webinars that I mentioned, I mean, they've been viewed something like 60,000 times globally, you know, so, and there's only 100 of them. So we saw a massive interest. There was a few people within our community that went back and did online executive MBAs. You know, this would be they said this is the only time we're going to have when we're at home to kind of study, when we're, you know, rather than commuting, because everyone, first of all, it was a gift. We all had that from a UK perspective. We had that commuting time back. For some of us, that's 2.5 hours in the day. You know, that's a lot of time. So I do think there was more of a focus on learning. A lot of our clients as well, they innovated in the beginning around, you know, so perhaps get together. Meetings weren't just meetings about work. You know, they would do fun stuff as well, you know, and giving them other learning opportunities. So bear in mind, I'm kind of a speaker. That's kind of what I do. So for about 2 months, all of that speaking work just disappeared. And then I'm going to talk about gender networks. So gender networks are 95 different organizations. It's the chairs and co-chairs of their internal women's networks. And bit by bit, they mobilized, and they were saying the same thing as us. We were reaching global audiences. We were more inclusive. But they brought around, if anything, most of them said that they tripled the amount of learning events that they did last year for their employees. So they could. So these women were able to learn things, hear different voices. And another really interesting thing, one of those things those women's networks struggle with is male engagement. And all of them said they see an uptick of men attending their events, which again was more inclusive, because the men didn't feel bad about popping onto a Zoom call as they would walking into a room full of women. You know, it's like, welcome to our world. That's normally what it's like for us. So there was a lot more learning events. And I think from a leadership perspective, leaders had to learn more about themselves. There was more self-awareness because they were more concentrated online. You know, if anything, I think they were more up for scrutiny, you know, in that online space. So I think, again, it was another leadership thing around kind of how they were coming across, how they came across as a leader, where they may be very comfortable in a room or a meeting room or a town hall. To put someone on a camera, I don't know, you feel a little bit exposed. So I know a number of senior male leaders said to me that they found it quite difficult at first. And again, from an inclusion perspective, the thing that I love, and I noticed it even with my own team, we're all in the same size box. There's no hierarchy in these boxes. And that was what was so beautiful. I heard voices in my team that I never heard before because they felt like they was on a level playing field. So I think the learning point is really, really important. And I think that will continue. I think we all got a little bit too much, you know, I think towards the end of the year, everyone was so zoomed out. It's like, really, you know, another call. I mean, some of my days were like 10 Zooms back to back. You know, you get to the end of the day and you're like, I honestly can't look at another screen. You know, you just go anywhere, kind of, you know, just walk outside for a little while. But I expect that hybrid model will come. I did a talk. I lecture for a university in the UK, corporate business, and I did my first physical talk a couple of weeks ago, and everyone was behind screens, and I was wearing a visor. but just that feeling of being in a room with people. And again, no amount of a virtual platform can give you that physical sense, you know. So I think, again, we can bring some of it back, but the virtual does work. As I say, it enables people to learn that wouldn't otherwise get those opportunities. For me, I've got now global associates, people that are working for me on pieces of work within WeAreTheCity that are based out in India, that are based out in other countries, because my talent pool, my skills pool is the whole of the world, you know. So for that bit of it's fantastic.
Yeah, completely agree with you. I think the talent pool that's now available, and you have access across the globe. So I think that makes a huge difference. And there's so many more people who can then be included into the workforce who had probably dropped out for various other reasons.
But also people's diversity of thought. You're hearing different people's opinions. And that is something, we've been on that journey for years to get the right people in the room. So you look around a room and everyone doesn't look like me. So now, you know, we're hearing that difference of opinion, and we will come up with different business solutions, and we will come up with different ways of innovating because we have diversity of thinking. And that, if anything, it's a blessing of the pandemic, is that.
True. Thanks so much. Raj, let me come back to you, and I'll build on the thing that you mentioned about trusting our leaders. And I think one of the biggest advantages that we had when we moved suddenly overnight into remote working was that there was already a trust bank. I knew who my boss was, I knew who my leader was, I knew who I had to co-work with, right? And there was an equation that was working well within us. And therefore, to a certain extent, it was easier. It was obviously tough. There were lots of challenges, but it was still easier because there was a personal connect with the person that wasn't lost overnight. But for all the new joinees and all the new people that you're onboarding today, how do you ensure that that trust and that inclusiveness, they feel included? And it's definitely tough for them. They don't know the culture, they don't know the people, they don't know what the office looks like in most cases. So how are you ensuring they feel part of the organization and the leadership does that?
It's tough, there's no easy answer, especially if you haven't worked with people. So, I think there are formal and informal arrangements, but conversations are the only way. We've actually triggered some conversation where you don't need to get to know people around you, who you are, where do you come from, this backstories. At least with the leaders, we did that. We did like 3-4 sessions sometime in November, December, when things were a little better. And we said we'll do it physically, even though there were people who were operating out of Hong Kong, Singapore. Said, just get them here and we've got to do the session. And as she said, as Vanessa said, there is something about the physical world. I know you, I can put a name, a face behind this name. Otherwise, you would just, in that sense, somebody who is behind the screen. So we did that. I think the critical learning that we've had is, even though we're virtual, we'll stay, even some people will work remote, but there is some kind of chance meetings, chance encounters that you need to do it. Or you need to ensure that, maybe when you're thinking about the strategy or approach on a project or whatever it may be, periodically, intermittently, that needs to be done. Second thing is some reach outs by my managers. It's essential because managers really become the window to the world. Don't start the conversation with the task, but how are you? What's happening in your life is always better. Simple things, actually. And one of the things I think I didn't realize, we used to have like this check-ins, right? Periodic check-ins, feedback check-ins that are there. In the physical world, people would come to the office and take notes. But in this virtual world, I realized those conversations extended a bit more. They were far richer because people were thoughtful and were trying to understand who the person is. So leverage your existing platforms and use it well, and maybe just expand the scope is how I see it. Talk about values, the regular stuff, induction, etc. will continue, but make the person feel part of it and introduce new rituals is how I see it. Yeah, but trust, I think for the work to work, and especially, all of us are, I say intrinsically, people who trust each other, as human beings. We are social beings. We trust the other person, and that the fact the other person will do good. Retain that. We don't need to now do policing, surveillance, etc., to say, how things don't happen. If we go with the mindset things will happen, and I think people respond as well. So that, I think, trust is a bedrock of ensuring work is happening. And coming back to the point that, especially inclusion, one of the things I feel is, the reason I'm optimistic is you getting different formats of people, right? Especially when we did gig or remote working, in some roles we put remote. 45 to 50% of my applicants are now women, even in technology roles. And here I'm thinking, maybe we were so used to having a scarcity conversation, talent is so scarce, I don't get supply. We kind of have said things to ourselves so many times, and we've made a virtue out of it. We are struggling. There are things that we should also look at ourselves in the mirror, saying that what are the barriers to it? Okay, geography is history. This is history. How do you kind of ensure that you go with an abundance mindset? And it is possible. There is nothing which is difficult. You need to see how can you harness best of both worlds. And this entire dialogue that's happening, or whether people should work only in offices or whether people should work only there, I think for some time we will straddle both the worlds till we get a nice equilibrium. But while straddling, I think we will ensure that women stay on, they don't leave, and managers also, especially when they were at home, even though women were the primary caregivers, the spouses, the partners had to step up. And then now they know what it means, right? Some appreciation, a little better is there, at least in our conversation, we recognize that. So, harness all the energy that we've gotten in these unfortunate times. All of these are silver linings or gifts that we see that we need to carry on.
Great. I mean, okay, I just realized what the time was, and the conversation is so engaging and interesting that I want to continue. But in the interest of time, I'm going to ask one last question to both of you. And I think, Vanessa, you put it out that, and I completely agree that to a certain extent, the pandemic has been a great equalizer. All of us are boxes, small boxes. There's no corner office, there's no large cabins and everything else, and everyone's visible on the same screen at the same size. But as companies now start, as life comes back to normal and we start going back to work, and most organizations are having 50-50, 60-40, whatever the rule may be, there would be this, I guess, hybrid working is going to be the new normal and the constant. My question to both of you is really, what are the good things of this pandemic that you would want to continue and ensure that the leaders don't forget and we continue with those things in this format of hybrid working? And how do we ensure the erstwhile things that have happened in the past where it's not worked, the voice on the phone gets lost, right? So you're in a conference call, you have 5 people in the room and 2 on the phone, even if they're on VCs. Usually that voice was always lost. So what do we do that we don't lose that voice this time and ensure that they are also part of the inclusive culture that we are building? So I leave the floor to both of you as my last question here, and whoever wants to go first.
I'm quite happy. I mean, I'm just going to reflect on, a lot of what Raj has said. I think the communication, I think leaders have learned that over communication is great. People need to feel needed and they need to be part of that dialogue. So communication, definitely. I think trusting your people as well. We're all adults. We will get our work done. There will be the odd exception to that rule, but we'll soon weed them out. So the flexibility and the trust that you give to your people. I think, that the fact that we wear an inclusion lens and we continue to do that everybody's circumstances are different. And when you are on a call, it's like, how does that person feel kind of, included? So I think there'll be the main things for me, that the continued investment in technology, it will carry us forward. Everybody, in my opinion, is a technologist now. It happened overnight. So those are the things. In terms, I do have a concern, even with hybrid working, and it plays to your point about the voices getting lost, and that's the younger generation. So we've all had the privilege of working in offices where we build relationships, where we learn and we observe, and that formulates your experience when you're younger. By taking that experience, older generation out of offices and keeping us at home, those youngsters are not getting exposure to that experience and to build that network that they need to progress in the organization. So it's not just the voices that get lost on a conference call. And again, I think if you've got that inclusion lens on, that you will never let a voice go unheard, but it's also being mindful of the voices that may get lost because we're not all in one place. So I think some of the models that I'm seeing around certain days in the office, you know, where everyone has their huddles, and again, it does breed innovation. You know, I mean, I've had some great calls, you know, when we were building the conference out, that was 160 speakers. I never met one of them face to face. And yet we came up with these sessions. And so you can do it, but there is nothing, even I've seen it with my own team, of us being in a room and being able to do that. So I think we need to be mindful in that hybrid environment that when we're in, that we're giving those youngsters exposure and access to experience, because they don't have the privilege that, and as much as we moan about it, oh, commuting, being in the office 5 days a week, long hours, that's what built us. That's what gave us our experience. And if we look forward to future years of work, we will have much different leaders if we don't pay attention to that. And the wrong people will get promoted, and, you know, it can have a whole kind of knock-on effect. So that would be my main concern around hybrid. Yeah, getting that model right. And I think we'll have to play with it a lot, but looking at that next generation of leaders and make sure we're nurturing that talent for the future by giving them accessibility to the senior leaders that they need.
Very well said, Vanessa. You know, I was just thinking, and I think you kind of built on the points that I was thinking. For me, in addition to the point on, you know, building inclusive leaders, and I think across the board, whoever I've spoken to, and I've spoken to the partners as well, actually investments in leadership has also gone up. I think it needs to continue and get strengthened even more, because all of us are realizing the whole model of leadership needs a little bit of tinkering around and rewiring. That may not be useful, you know, how we kind of led organizations, especially we've got to be more technology savvy. Actually, all of us have to be technology first, leaders first, right? You know, and don't have to go with the prefixed templates. So that's one, I would say, continue investing in leadership. Second, I think is, for me, the lens of inclusion also comes with building a more sustainable organization, right? ESG is here to stay. I would look at DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, with the lens of sustainability. It's about building sustainable cultures, climate, the challenges, inequalities, inequity in the society, etc. All will reflect back, and good organizations have to build more sustainability into the fabric and even in the leadership conversation. That started and will continue. Third is, I think at the micro level, at least in our context, I can say people managing and respecting time. Or the meetings have done that. You know, if you get into a Zoom call or Teams meeting, even 5 minutes late, people are really apologetic, which never used to happen in physical world, you know. So I hope it continues. And I couldn't agree more that the raw talent, the emerging leaders are the ones who are getting lost out. But, you know, where we need to invest more is their own communication. Most of them actually don't even raise the voice. They're happy. They're a generation who are happy just sending mails, maybe asynchronous communication. And sometimes we've got to teach them, rewire them, saying that, you know, just pick up a call and have a conversation. And that's what managers need to kind of ensure, that their voices don't get lost out, but we've got to train them how to have a voice and how to speak out and put your point of view. But there are mega trends this decade we'll see. The fact that people are moving back from some cities to their hometowns and all of that, they're here to stay. People are getting more skilled. That's a positive thing. And organization will be more specialized as well. And everybody knows that to sustain in this virtual world, your job has to count for where you've got to contribute. You can't have like generalist translators anymore, where you're just passing work from it, which actually bodes well for inclusion and people with skills and generally people to develop themselves as food professionals, right? So I think growth, models of leadership, models of HR are all out here to pivot. And I'm very, very optimistic in terms of, I think it augurs well, because the sponsorship is there, the timing is right, we're all using technology as a key enabler. It just means that we harness it together collectively. Whatever work we do, all of us actually give back to community in a big way.
Thanks so much. So much to learn from both of you. I had a great time, and I'm sure our audiences would enjoy this too. You know, it's difficult to sum up our discussion, but some of the key things that kind of stayed with me, and I'll, you know, the choice in voice the inclusion being choice and voice, I think that really is going to stay with me. And I'm going to probably use this, Raj. I'm going to tell you right now that I'm probably be using this a lot more often going forward. But no amount of communication is enough in the times of crisis. And I think that's another key tip. Everyone needs to upskill. Technology platforms and new technology is what everyone needs to learn. Leaders need to be more self-aware. And I think, we need to invest a lot more and continue to invest more in our people as we are progressing forward. I think, Vanessa, you mentioned a very small point, but I think it was so strong, is that everyone is becoming a leader now. An individual sitting in the, working alone is actually a leader, and he or she. So I think that's, and that's inclusiveness in some shape and form for sure. So thank you so much, both of you. And I know that you're very positive, and I'm very positive that this pandemic will teach us a lot and has taught us a lot. And we will continue to take some of the goods of remote working as we move into hybrid working. So thank you once again. Pleasure having you here on this session.
And thank you, Ratika, for your wonderful facilitation. And Raj, lovely to meet you.
Likewise. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.